Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get started promptly. We've got maybe one or two to join us, but we'll do that when they come. Good evening, I'm Chris Poulter. I'm chairman of this Executive Scrutiny Committee Board meeting tonight on Monday, the 12th of March, here in the Council Chamber. Any apologies?
Just apologies from Councillor Mulhall.
Okay. I don't believe there are any late items.
There are none, Chair.
That leads us to item 3, and any declaration of interest on matters on the agenda, please. No, that's a negative then. We can move on to item 4 in the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of February. I'm happy to propose them. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Wright will second those. Any serious matters arising out of those minutes? No? Good. In that case, we can move on to the forward plan. Item 5 on the forward plan. Any questions, comments, observations on the forward plan? Can I just raise one briefly, and I don't know if there's anybody here to answer the query. I'm looking over towards Catherine or somebody. I noticed coming into the forward plan is a new logo in effect for the city. Pioneering Derby is going to be brought forward as a thing, and I don't know much about it, and actually the forward plan item doesn't say much. Do you know anything about it, Will?
Yes, so I think this is essentially sort of some sort of city branding, so trying to like tie a lot of the attractions together. I think originally the intention was to bring it to this meeting. However, on reflection, I don't think it meets the criteria for a key decision, so it's going to be withdrawn from the forward plan. That doesn't prevent yourselves, I think, from getting some information on it, though. If you would like me to perhaps contact Stella Burke.
I guess that was my I guess that was my query, because I thought, okay, branding, we can do that. Yeah. That can be done through the media office and with the Regen and City Centre team. But I was querying why it was in fact classed as a key decision, unless there was some significant spending to go into it, and which was a concern of mine. Councillor Bonser, did you put your hand up? You was fine. Catherine, did you want to? I'd looked at you initially.
Sorry, I'm just trying to work my microphone. I am aware of the initiative, Chair, and as Craig said, I'm aware that that's the rationale. There is no key decision at this point, but in terms of the proposals for that branding, it's been put together by the Destination Derby Board, which is a wider partnership of organisations from across Derby City looking at how best to promote the city for visitor economy purposes. So just by way of a bit of context, that's where it's come from. So I'm sure, as Craig said, if there was anything that members wanted to know more about, then we'd be happy to share, but it's not a key decision for the purpose of Cabinet.
So, as and when now they've prompted our interest in it, when they are ready, if you'd ask them to come and brief us on the plan, briefly once they're ready, once it's in a state where it's appropriate to bring it. Councillor Bonser. Sorry,
Chair, I will just chip in. This was one of the subjects that was covered by Stella Burke, I think, at the last councillor training session. She did do a small presentation on this at the end of that meeting, so we have received a short briefing at the end of that session.
Thank you. That's why I didn't recognise it, because I wasn't able to make that training and I was away. But yes, Councillor Kerr.
I think you've highlighted an important point, Chair, that if people weren't able to get to that briefing, they won't be aware of it, and to provide something as an email that could come out to everybody would, I think, be helpful. If it's not being covered, I haven't read every one of our emails.
But the first I'd heard of it was
if it's not been there, then that will give us another chance to know what's going on.
Okay, that satisfies my curiosity in respect to that. On the forward plan, is there any other items that anybody wanted to query? No? Okay. Moving on from there then, it moves us to, bear with me, the other council cabinet responses to the scrutiny recommendations. And if you remember, last time we met, we made 3 effectively. We made one in relation to the OCOR funding and encouraging the cabinet to progress that as quickly as possible. We made a recommendation there. Was that where we included your, Councillor Kerr, your recommendation in relation to the pie chart and some more training in relation to assessment for climate change purposes?
It was certainly last time, yes.
Okay. And then the other recommendation was in relation to the sale of 2 parcels of land, which there are a lot of questions about and a lot of uncertainty and doubt about the idea. But the recommendation was that any receipts from that sale should be used in relation to local parks and amenity spaces and be earmarked for ring fence for that purpose. That was declined by Cabinet, but there has been a subsequent call-in, which I'll remind you is being scheduled for this time next Monday to deal with the call-in in respect of that item. We'll be resuming, that will be our next meeting this time next Monday. So we'll take that from there. So overall, there is a chart of how a cabinet have dealt with recommendations, and whilst they do reject some of the recommendations that we put, they are often accepting of or noting of any recommendations we put forward. So there's a running record on how much respect they give to our recommendations. Okay, well, we'll move on to the main business then, and that of item 7 in the council cabinet agenda, which is Wednesday's meeting at 2 o'clock. And the first item that we need to consider, there are the normal items to start the meeting, and they will receive any recommendations that we put from tonight's meeting under their item 7. But the item 8 is the funding for new arrivals allowance. I'm looking who's going to speak to that. Pop, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, I won't go through the report line by line and just give an overview of the recommendation and request to Council Cabinet. So the report sets out a request to passport a proportion of the funding that we receive from central government from asylum and resettlement grants to Community Action Derby, value of 322,000, to continue the work and development of the New Arrivals Alliance. The New Arrivals Alliance supports asylum seekers, refugees and those arriving through resettlement schemes in Derby through a managed and coordinated voluntary sector response. So funding for the Alliance, as I say, is wholly paid from government grants, specifically the Asylum Dispersal Grant, Homes for Ukraine Grant and Afghan Resettlement Grants. Central government awards asylum and resettlement grants to local authorities to support them in managing the accommodation, integration and welfare needs of asylum seekers and refugees. And on today's agenda, you will see further in financial matters. Council Cabinet will be requested to make a decision on accepting the 24-25 grants. In considering the options for support and delivering the requirements placed upon us, we did consider the establishment of a dedicated local authority unit, so keeping the funding within the authority. We don't have a unit as such, so it would require the recruitment of new staff. And having an internal unit would take a more direct approach to service provision whilst ensuring that all services are well coordinated and aligned with local need. We did discount that option primarily because of increased costs. Creating a new unit within the authority may result in higher operational costs, including staffing, training and infrastructure, which could negate some of the cost-effective benefits of working with the voluntary sector. We also have to recognise that as a local authority that we can be slow to adapt. Public sector organisations are subject to stricter financial regulations and slower decision-making processes, which could reduce the flexibility and the need to respond quickly to the changing needs of asylum seekers and refugees. Also, there's a risk if not coordinated properly with other organisations, there may be duplication of services and inefficiencies. Ultimately, supporting the voluntary sector provides cost-effective targeted services that reduce the long-term financial burden on the local authority whilst also enhancing community resilience and integration. And that can be captured by lower overheads and flexible working, specialised expertise within the community and voluntary sector, which meets the needs of those groups. The potential to access additional funding that local authorities are not able to access, and again, reducing future demand on statutory services. The key elements, though, are their agility and responsiveness to local community needs and the changing needs within our new arrivals, and ultimately the building local resilience within the community and voluntary sector.
Okay, thank you for those headlines from that part. Any questions, comments on this, Councillor Kerr?
I'd just like to welcome the cooperation with the voluntary sector in Derby as part of this scheme. I think it's a good way of working for this particular purpose. I was wondering, though, if we know where the grants, which part of the government these grants are originating from, and whether they are likely to be under threat with government changes in funding priorities recently.
I suspect the source is the Home Office, but Pop might be able to confirm for us. And any fears of changes in relation to funding on this?
Yes, it is the Home Office that we receive all three grants from. The future landscape is unclear. There were the announcements just over a week ago in the increase in the defence budget, and part of the funding would be taken from the overseas aid budget. The overseas aid budget is part of what supports the asylum and resettlement estate here in the UK. So longer term future, I couldn't guarantee, but we've had no indication that there'll be any reduction in funding.
You mean to tell me you haven't got a political crystal ball then, Pop, that you can look into?
Only at the weekends.
Okay, yes, Martin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this is a good way of working, to be honest, in terms of partnership with the voluntary sector, because many of these voluntary sector organisations will be working with these groups in any case. So, as it says in the report, hopefully they'll have the background knowledge and the experience of already working with many of the asylum seekers who will be supported through this grant. And I'd also say it's very positive in that it's taking a preventative approach, hopefully. So by being able to support people at an earlier stage, then any issues will hopefully be resolved quickly, and there'll be less need for more expensive interventions by the statutory services later on. So I think it's to be welcome, Chair. The funding's coming from the government, so it's not council funds are being used, but I think the benefit for the new arrivals themselves and people of Derby in terms of providing support to our services will be positive. So I think it should be welcome, Chair.
Thank you for that. From my own perspective, I absolutely think that the community action and voluntary services in the city are probably best placed to be able to support these this type of work. My concern, if I'm honest, is the capacity to do so, and their need for training and skills to be built up to be able to, because it's not an insignificant piece of work, Bob, I don't think, that needs doing. And as you said, we would have needed to recruit. I suspect the voluntary sector might need to recruit as well to it, and it's an important and quite large piece of work. So I was going to ask you, and the Cabinet member who's here as well, thank you for attending, your thoughts in relation to the voluntary sector's ability to cope with this requirement in a timely manner. Are they up for it?
Yeah, certainly, the short answer is yes, they are up for it. This work builds on activity that they've undertaken over the last 18 months in the development of the New Arrivals Alliance. The work was really kicked off in the early stages by an external kind of evaluation of the sector within the city. That was the Julian Pryor report that scoped the organisations working within the city, the gaps, the efficiencies, but also the development needs, and that's part of the aim of the Alliance. By bringing all of those organisations that support asylum seekers and refugees under one umbrella, there's better coordination and use of resources. As part of that development and delivery, there is the recruitment of a new arrivals coordinator. That person's responsibility essentially is to service those organisations, identify the development needs. The key to it is a single point of access. That's the one thing that we do not have within the city at the moment, to identify the needs of the individuals, but also the most appropriate organisation to meet their needs. That should hopefully allay those fears that they're being directed to organisations that can't support them. So that development of infrastructure will be built in.
So they have the appropriate buildings and facilities to be able to deal with what they're being required to do?
Yeah, the organisations range from the larger ones such as the British Red Cross, the Derby Refugee Forum, and Upbeat Communities. Those are probably the three largest and most established. We then start to move down through some of the other organisations, Care for Calais, Derby Refugee Solidarity, and I know DRS have been in the media over the last few months around their capacity. And again, this is part of trying to solve that issue that individuals may potentially serve more than one organisation, creating demand within the system. And again, having a single point of access will mitigate that pressure. At the extreme end of it, we have the small community groups, kind of the 2 or 3 people that are just supporting with a coffee morning or within a church setting. So again, to be able to map all of those, have that journey for people, should, one, reduce the reliance on services, but also take away that pressure because people are going to the most appropriate service for their needs.
Yeah, just add to that, we're really lucky in Derby. We've got a network of over 200 agencies that are part of what we would call City of Sanctuary. We welcome these people. They know what they're doing. I think in terms of the single point of contact, we've not had that. So we were finding that work was being done multiple times by different agencies. But obviously bringing that single point of contact will eradicate that. And I think if you look at other areas around the city that are going to be expected to take some asylum seekers and refugees, they're going to really struggle because they've got nothing in place at all. Whereas here, we've got a really good network in place. So I think this will really benefit with this single point of contact. And there's a website being built, well, near enough built, isn't it, Pop? Yes, there's that single point of contact where we can divert them to the best place to be welcomed, supported and looked after. So, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I would just add to that as well. It's just the range of organisations and kind of the specialisms as well, especially if we think of our Ukrainian arrivals. So to be able to work with the Association of Ukrainians, Great Britain here in the other city, and help develop their capacity and knowledge as well. So that's part of the learning that will go on, is that whilst they're very specialised with one group, it's the learning from all of the other partners as well then that comes into play in terms of developing the infrastructure going forward.
Councillor Wright, you want to come in?
Yes, as well as the scope for a single point of contact and the myriad of organisations in responding to this need. I think what is also crucial is that it gives a scope for an organic approach. So it gives scope for being flexible, because one may not know exactly what the needs are and they could change over a given period of time. So this sort of arrangement does allow for the evolution or organic response to serving the needs and supporting those that come as asylum seekers. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think you need to be flexible because their needs are many and varied, and anybody dealing with this area needs to be capable of flexibility. So overall, I absolutely understand it. I think it's an important subject. I think maybe as a committee we should recommend that Cabinet monitor the outcomes closely on this over the next period of time, and maybe bring us a report back on the outcomes and progress made. Would that make sense? You okay with that?
Yeah, so we've got Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report and ask that Cabinet monitor the outcomes.
Closely monitor outcomes from this project, from the scheme, and give us a report on outcomes and progress made. Maybe 6 months, 12 months, in that sort of period. Okay, thank you. Before you go, Bob, and you touched on it very briefly, there are some items in the financial matters later on in the agenda which relate to this area and your field, if you like. And I had got a couple of questions in relation to that. Is there anybody else there or here, or can we deal with those now? Well, I think it makes sense to do it now because it's quite closely related to the matter. So if we jump forward a little bit, and Pop, if you've got it ready, there are a couple of items in the financial matters in relation to accepting grants and delegating the powers, applying for grants, accepting the grants and delegating the powers that come from it later on. My query, Pop, is, as you know, I know that over the years there have been grants, but they come with conditions, and they have been in the past inadequate in their amounts to cover the costs of the roles that the council needs to do. So it's actually cost the council. And my query is really in relation to the applications sought permission for in the later documents. Is what are the strings? Is it going to cost the council, or is it match funding, or because there have been times in the past where we've declined to bid into certain grant funding, bearing in mind the pressures that we as a city have in terms of asylum seekers and the number of asylum seekers, the location of where asylum seekers are housed and being disproportionately spread, things like that. What's your assessment on the risks in terms of bidding for this funding?
Firstly, I think just to clarify, it's a bit awkward in terms of the standard forms that we use, that we have to bid, accept, and then approve the other grants. The bid is a bit misleading in the sense that these three particular grants, the Homes for Ukraine, Afghan resettlement and asylum, we don't actually have any choice over those individuals settling in the city. So by default, we accept the funding that comes through. But it's just the way our processes work that we have to be seen to be bidding for it. But it's more just accepting the funding. Certainly in terms of the asylum seekers, the funding is never adequate. 2 years, well, if I turn the clock back 3 years, we would receive no funding whatsoever in relation to asylum dispersal within the city. That changed to receiving a one-off payment of £250 per person on a given date. So whatever that count was, static count, we received £250 per head. That changed a year ago. That was increased to £750 per person. Now, the asylum seekers in the city are our largest cohort, so we're just almost shy of £1 million coming in relation to that dispersal. A change that's happened recently is that we don't just get a one-off payment, so as people come in and our numbers increase, we get additional funding for those individuals as well. And certainly where bed spaces are created, it's an additional payment of £3,500 per bed space. So the finances are increasing. However, the main impacts, as set out in the report, we're trying now to mitigate through the voluntary sector. We're trying to get that funding stretching further. So hopefully it will meet the needs and demands that we have. With the Afghan resettlement, the way that scheme works is for Afghans who who are brought into the country, so there's no refugee status here. People are given indefinite leave to remain by the Ministry of Defence because of their work for or with the government in Afghanistan, putting their lives at risk. So they are brought in. They can choose whichever city or location they want to settle in under the find your own accommodation. So they will move where they go. So similarly, once they arrive, we will draw the funding down. And then the same process with the Ukrainian refugees as well. It's wherever the sponsorship is, they will go and live within that city. And again, we will accept the funding. Now, there are various tariffs, and the Financial Matters report sets that out in terms of the different levels of funding. What we are in a position, and we're getting the go-ahead from government to do a mix and match around the funding, so we're not having to ring-fence for particular groups, and so only spend one on that group and not spend it on the other. So that allows us to be more flexible with the funding. Certainly over the last 12 months, we have managed to stay within budget. The biggest pressure comes from housing costs. It's more the process at the end of moving into the private renter sector. But over the last 12 months, the way the finances have worked, we've stayed within those budgets. We've not had to go outside of those. I'll just say one more thing kind of going forward. One thing that we have been assured of is that in terms of the asylum dispersals, an agreement was reached in November with the government that our overall numbers of asylum dispersal will not increase. So you've experienced in years past where we've gone from 300 to 600 to 900 to 1,000. We will not have that increase at this time.
I appreciate that, because that was the area of concern. One of the three, that was the area of concern for me, because we're all aware, I think, that there's a drive to empty the hotels where asylum seekers are accommodated. And again, from previous history, the team that look after, our colleagues that look after that dispersal, in my view, we're looking at Derby too closely. In terms of percentage share and things. So if that's been agreed that we are at that capacity, then that reassures me a little. But yeah, because there were serious concerns about the concentration levels in the areas, weren't there? Is that as was, or have we managed to address any of that?
It's pretty much as was. We're into what's something that's called maintain and replace. So, as I say, there's no intention to increase the number of bed spaces within the city. Serco, who have the responsibility for the accommodation, are essentially, if they close a property down for whatever reason, they still have to approach us to replace that property. And part of our strategy is, as we have done for a number of years now, had a moratorium around procurement and new properties opening up, especially within the Abbey Arboretum and Normanton area where we have the highest concentration. So by a natural process, we start to reduce those numbers and filter out across the wider city area.
Just as a comment to you as Cabinet Member, I think whilst as Pop explains, these are grants that, well, yes, we technically have to apply for them, but we get them, we'd get them anyway. But we need to make sure we have the capacity to do the right things with them and only accept them if the numbers are right. Sounds like those numbers have been addressed. But again, it's another area I think that you, Cabinet Member, will need to keep a close monitoring eye on and report back any major concerns that you have. Your thoughts? Do you have any other thoughts on the subject? Okay, and unless there's Councillor Holmes.
Just a quick couple of questions for Pop. In terms of local health provisions such as GP surgeries and school placements, if there's families involved and children of that age, how obviously the council will play a part in terms of school placements, but how is the local health services, is that dealt with in a different mechanism?
Yeah, there's a separate funding tariff that goes to the Integrated Care Board for each arrival, but that is only within the Homes for Ukraine and Afghan resettlement grants. There is no direct health grant in relation to asylum. There is a standard funding package that ICBs receive in terms of asylum dispersal, but that is around the health centres and initial health screening rather than the GP practices. Similarly with school placements, with the Homes for Ukraine and the Afghan resettlement, there is an additional education tariff based on age for year one. But again, similarly with the asylum, there's no additional education tariff. Yeah.
Does that have an impact on our available school places in terms of obviously, because obviously we do horizon scanning, and then obviously this is an additional potential number of city schools. So how do we deal with that?
It's very much as needs. So the school place planning will look to see what the kind of migration into the other city just in general will be. With asylum, the main dispersals to the other city at the moment are single adult males, so we have no impact in terms of the education side of things. With the Ukrainian refugees and Afghan refugees who may come into the other city, that is a completely unknown figure, and we would just have to react as with any other family moving into the other city.
Thanks, Paul. In my experience, Councillor Holmes, we should be very thankful to a small number of doctors' surgeries who've taken a keen interest and a responsibility in relation to children and families, and the same with schools, where they've applied to schools. I think schools have gone out of their way to accommodate them and keep up the need for education. So as a city, I think we are quite accommodating in such circles, but it's not an insignificant requirement on those two subjects as a result. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just say one more thing. Within the health side of it, it possibly want to talk about outside of the meeting, because we could do a really deep dive into the other support. But as the Chair said, there are 2 surgeries that provide dedicated support, a GP support to to asylum seekers. We also fund internally the ICB's family health service, so the 0 to 19 service. So we have enhanced provision for those individuals. And on the education side, we also have the New Communities Achievement Team, who deal with all children who are English as an additional language. So they will provide support in school settings as well. Okay,
so thank you for that. I think that's dealt with that element of the financial matters, so we can release you to your other duties, Bob. Thank you. Okay, that moves us on to item 9 and the East Midlands Combined Authority and how the shared prosperity funding is going to be dealt with as a result of that. Is that you, Catherine?
That's me. Thank you, Chair. Yep, Catherine Williams, Head of Regeneration and Economic Growth. So as you've introduced, this report is about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund programme, and for the last 3 years this has been directly run through Derby City Council with funding allocated to local authorities and managed by local authorities across 3 investment priority areas. And those priority areas have been communities in place, supporting local business and people and skills. So the government have extended the UK SPF programme for 1 year, but only as a transitional arrangement. So we expect to hear about a wider growth funding reform exercise that should take effect from the start of next financial year. So funds for Derby City are still going to be allocated by the East Midlands Combined Authority, who are going to be directly responsible for receiving and managing the funding. They intend to add £2 million of their own core funding that was received through the gain share arrangement to that SPF funding, and an amount will be top sliced by EMCA as well, because certain things that local authorities were delivering will be delivered at a sub-regional level from now onwards. So in section 4.9, we've given an overview of the priorities, the themes and the sub-themes. So this is still very structured, and the funding is intended to deliver a number of outcomes around economic growth and increasing living standards. And we're in ongoing dialogue with EMCA about how the SPF funding will be received and deployed. We've not got all the details about how that's going to work, but we do expect that we'll need to submit an investment plan to EMCA to explain how Derby intends to use our allocation. So in terms of the amounts of money, broadly speaking, in round numbers, Derby City's direct allocation that we'll be receiving to spend on those 3 investment priorities is just under 3.3 million. This is in section 4.12, and it's split roughly 2/3, 1/3 between revenue and capital. Overall, 4.13 highlights that whilst nationally there's been a 40% reduction of SPF, for Derby, because of the way the allocations are determined around deprivation, we've actually managed to secure about 85% of our current allocation, so that compares relatively favourably. The other couple of points to note are that inward investment support, there's work going on to look at this, how that might work at a regional level with EMCA, but for this transitional year, we are working with EMCA to directly support Marketing Derby, who I'm sure everybody is aware perform that inward investment function for the city. So EMCA will allocate a grant of £300,000 to the City Council that we will then passport through to Marketing Derby. So there's a recommendation around that. And there's also, just picking up a point you made earlier, Chair, about funding generally, there is an agreement that 4% of that funding can be used for management and administration of the programme. So the cost of the council for running this programme will be covered from that 4%. So in summary, we're seeking delegated authority to agree the terms of the grant and accept the £3.3 million of SPF funding from EMCA, to adjust the capital programme as we need to, and to approve grants to any external partners that deliver SPF activity. And then there's a separate recommendation around the inward investment grant allocation. So that's a summary, and happy as always to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions from Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. Two questions. The first one is about the box here, which talks about young people who are at risk or are of being not in education and training. And I was just wondering whether that applies only to people over the age of 16 or 18, or whether it also applies for those young people who are not managing to be in education at a younger age. And what sort of services are being provided through that. And the second one relates to paragraph 4.11, which is saying that we need to submit plans to EMCA about how we are using this money. It's a really short time scale if it is coming back by the 1st of April. And I just wondered whether that is covered in one of the recommendations or whether there's a recommendation for that and whether that information could be shared in some way more widely. Thank you.
Yeah, Catherine, if you want to come back on those, I share the concerns about the timescales. In effect, I'm very conscious and aware that this funding, like you say, has been dealt with by us for the last 3 years, but for technical reasons, it's gone to the combined authority. Who, if we're honest, I think if they were honest, are not in a position to direct how it's spent or to spend it themselves. So it's been passported back to those authorities that's had it in the past, although it's by a reduced number, 85% of. But for me, it's caused a delay in time, in that if we'd known that we were getting it again this year, we'd be in a place to spend it, spend it wisely, and to be, because there are authorities, other partner agencies that have benefited from some of this funding, where if the criteria is changed, has it put any of our partner deliverers under shared prosperity into difficulty with delays or uncertainty about whether or not the funding is coming? And as Councillor Kerr points out, the timescales are short. Yes, I expect, and we would expect that the authority, that the combined authority would want to know how we're going to spend it, and I presume they'll want to know how we spent it at the end. But there'll be different arrangements as of next year, I believe. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, the ages of the benefits in terms of skills, and then the timescales, if you would.
Okay, so forgive me, Councillor Kerr, I don't have the exact definition for NEETs, whether it's 16 or 18. I would have to go away and confirm, but I believe there is such a definition, and that would apply for this particular theme. So however that's been managed in the past, I believe that would continue. But I will come back to you on that point. And then in terms of the timescales, yes, certainly appreciate that it is a short timescale, and we've been spending a lot of time working with MCA, firstly for them to understand how this transitional year is going to work, and then in turn how we're going to play a part in that at a local level. I'm not aware of any organisations that have got into significant difficulty as a result of that uncertainty. I think it is a transitional year. It's worth highlighting that this funding is only committed for another year. So any initiatives and projects that we do support have to have a robust exit strategy for the end of that time, because we simply don't know beyond 26, 27 what the arrangements will look like, and what role Derby City Council will have to play as a local authority in deploying any future growth funding that might come forward. So it is a transitional year. And I think in terms of the spending wisely, obviously we've got really good handle because of the 3 years that we've been managing the programme about what's been performing well and what projects are in a position to continue and which projects have maybe run their natural course. So we are working on that at the moment. And as I think you've both suggested, if there's a desire to see that investment plan as once it's agreed with MCA in terms of what the proposals are, then we'd be more than happy to share that. I think the only other point I'd make is the reason we've included that chart in 4.9 is it is very prescribed in terms of particular targets that you have to hit for SPF funding. So any project has to be able to demonstrate that it meets certain criteria, so it's not completely flexible in terms of how it's used at a local level. So there is that framework we've got to be mindful of as well.
And I guess any future replacement scheme will be similar. And the priorities may well be different, but the grants will be made in a similar fashion, if you like.
Yeah, and as I alluded to earlier, the role of EMCA and the local authority may stay the same, or that may change as well in terms of how the money is managed and deployed.
I mean, I queried the effect on partner agencies who are reliant on shared prosperity funding, probably because I'm aware that some of the district councils who were allocated this funding for the last year or two, I think, they have partners who deliver us who are reliant on this funding. I am aware that Marketing Derby are dependent on that amount of funding for their operation, but the county authority has made provision throughout the region, haven't they, in terms of Nottingham and Nottingham City and Derbyshire and Derby getting an element of combined funding to promote the region. So, and that will develop as it goes. But I think we should appreciate that funding is given Marketing Derby the capacity to continue and expand its role, if in effect, to county and regional benefit. Yeah.
The mostly yes. The funding, as you suggested, Chair, for Marketing Derby of 300,000 is essentially continue to enable them to do what they do now for Derby City. There are similar allocations for the other parts of EMCA as well. So for Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, there are other allocations for inward investment activity that aren't directly going to go via Marketing Derby. They're still very much focused on the city. In terms of what happens next, there's work going on, I think we refer to it in the report, to look at how inward investment and the visitor economy as well might be approached on a regional basis, but those discussions are very much in their infancy at the moment, so we'd need to come back on that.
But it is a major priority of the East Midlands Combined Authority, and for it to be done on a regional basis, and the inward investment's a major part of what business promotion that they want to be doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Kerr?
Just to clarify whether one of the recommendations does cover the submission of that plan.
I don't believe it does explicitly. I'm just having a look at the recommendations now. It's for the negotiation and entering into the grant agreement. So I guess it's implicit but not explicit in that recommendation.
Okay. So I'm picking up from committee that maybe out of all that, what we need is to note the report, but to welcome the funding, but ask for details of the spending plan to be expedited and to be shared with ourselves at some point in the near future. Is that okay, folks? You got that, Craig?
Yeah, so Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note and welcome the report and ask details of the spending plans are shared with the committee in due course.
Yes, agreed? Okay, good. We can move on then to item 10. Where's my thing gone?
Yeah, it's back to compliance with contract and financial procedure rules.
Right, yes. Yes. The team at the front.
Sorry, Peter, can you just turn your microphone on, please?
Oh, well. So I'll start again. My name is Pete Shilcock. I'm a Group Accountant for Corporate Finance, and I'm here to present the Financial Matters Report going to March Cabinet. The report covers 7 areas, and I'll go through them briefly one by one. First of all, this public health substance misuse, which is recommendation 2.1 and 2.2. The report asks for acceptance of a Section 31 ring-fence grant of up to £3.2 million and to delegate authority to enter into all necessary contracts and agreements associated with this grant funding. In 25-26, the grant is from the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities and is to support improvements in the quality and capacity of drug and alcohol-related treatments. It's an amalgamation of several previous grants that the Council has been in receipt of since 21-22, and the grant will be allocated to existing contracted providers through public health commissioners. The second item is Micklehove Primary School, recommendations 2.3 through to 2.7. The school has requested an additional £255,000 worth of capital works to be included in the current capital scheme. This is to provide an additional classroom so as to enable the school to expand their before and after school club provision. The additional works will be funded by the school. Recommendations 2.3 to 2.7 deal with the necessary approvals and delegations required to allow this to happen. The report asks for a delegation to agree terms, enter a legal agreement and sign a third-party contribution letter and to approve the proposed additional capital works of circa £255,000 once the agreements are finalised. The Council has been asked by the Department of Education to sign a third-party contribution letter to fund these works. As the school will fund the full costs of the additional works, the Council will enter into a legal agreement with the school governors and the school to fund the associated costs. The Council will sign the legal agreement with the school before signing the third-party contribution letter with the DfE. The third item covers Household Support Fund, recommendation 2.8 and 2.9. This relates to the acceptance of extended Household Support Fund number 7 for the financial year 25-26 for an estimated £4 million grant and the associated delegated authority to contribute and to provide support to households who would otherwise struggle to buy food, pay essential bills and living costs. We're still awaiting the final details on this, so no final settlement as yet, so we're basing the grant on the previous year's allocation. Item 4 covers Darley Park Improvement Project, recommendation 2.10 and 2.11. The report asks for approval to bid for and accept National Heritage Lottery funding of £250,000 and, if successful, to add it to the capital programme alongside the £165,000 of Section 106 funds already earmarked to the park. The scheme totalling £415,000 will support improvements to the site as detailed in paragraph 4.42. Briefly, it's to refurbish the play area, some artwork with interactive elements, the refurbishment of Ada's seat and access improvements. Item 5 is Home Office grants, recommendation 2.12 and 2.13. The report asks for approval to bid for and accept 3 asylum and resettlement support grants from the Home Office up to a value of £2.6 million. And this can be broken down with £500,000 for Home for Ukraine, to pay sponsors who support named Ukrainian guests, up to £400,000 for Afghan permanent resettlement to support resettlement of Afghan citizens who have assisted UK efforts, and the third element is asylum dispersal grant of up to £1.7 million. Item 6, recommendation 2.14, covers debt write-off. In accordance with the Council's corporate debt policy, the report asks for approval to write off a number of individual debts totalling £2.561 million. The detail is contained in Appendix 1 of this report. Briefly, the service is going through a journey of improvement where we have centralised the debt function and dedicated a significant amount of time to it this year. 2.5 million write-off in the context of business rates, adult social care and sundry debts totalling circa 120 million is a relatively small percentage, around 2%. And finally, Holiday Activity Fund, item 7, recommendation 2.15 and 2.16. The report asks for approval to accept £1.465 million of grant funding from the Department of Education to fund family support by providing free activities and meals during school holidays in 25-26. The report also seeks for a delegation on deciding how the funds should be spent within the grant conditions. That concludes the 7 items.
Thank you. A brief run through there of these matters, and just a general comment, Craig, from me. there's not a lot of detail in there in these financial matters. We've been there before with this and asked that the explanation is beefed up a little bit more than the 3 or 4 lines. For example, the holiday activities funding programme is two lines and 1 word in relation to that, and that's £1.5 million worth of funding, which isn't a lot of explanation. And the delegations that are asked for with it are quite deep, and an example of that might be the public health substance misuse grant funding. We may pay something like £1 million to a provider to provide services in relation to that. And if the delegation is that, what check and balance do we have on those contracts and their governance, if you like? So, from my point of view as chair, I'd ask that the report whoever prepares the report, includes an element of more detail in those, and some clarity in relation to delegations, because if we are issuing a contract or subcontracting some of this funding to a partner agency or whatever, is that not a key decision in itself? Should somebody not have oversight of that might be appropriate for audit and accounts to have that information, but somebody somewhere should have oversight of these schemes. You with me? I don't know if the cabinet members have any thoughts on that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I've not got the. 2 lines for the HAF project isn't really acceptable, is it?
There is a little bit more detail in the report, but delegations, for me, the delegations and the check on outcomes and governance on some of these grants, because we'll be making grants to partner agencies in relation to the drugs and the HAF and even how we distribute the household support fund money. So then somebody needs some clarity, and I would suggest maybe the appropriate body there might be the audit and accounts. Do you think so, Craig?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's certainly a question I can go away and get an answer to.
Yeah, if you'd have a look at that for me and come back with me suggestions, yes.
I'll just add to that, so on the Household Support Fund, we can tell you where every bit of that money's gone, through what agency and what the outcomes have been. We do get a detailed breakdown of that. If maybe that could come to you guys if you don't get that. I didn't realise that everyone didn't get that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess that would be the case. We should know where every penny goes, but it's the outcomes from that funding that need to be, in my view, looked at, and that might well be audit and accounts, I would suggest. But Craig's going to look into where that sort of thing might be covered. Yeah. So, sorry to open to the... Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I was wanting to comment on the first of these grants, the Public Health Substance Misuse Funding. And it mentions, not surprisingly, in that first paragraph, 4.1, that it is primarily for drug and alcohol treatment and recovery. The Health and Wellbeing Board has also had a presentation in the last 6 months about the addiction to gambling. And I don't know whether there's an equivalent grant that is given to support recovery from gambling. But if there isn't, then I think this might be an opportunity to highlight that as something that it would be useful to have funding for. And if we can, potentially, although there's a lot of problem with alcohol and drugs as well, some of the gambling is actually alongside these other things, and to be able to address people's problems holistically is probably going to be a good idea. So it's how we can fit that within this sort of combined support for individuals.
Yeah, I mean, we can take that back to public health colleagues to get their view on it, and we can get back to you, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. I'm elated by the Darley Improvement Project. Darley Park, along with Arboretum Park, of course, is one of the jewel in the crown in terms of our green space and the heritage of this city. And I know that during the COVID period, having that green space saved a lot of people's mental health, being able to go out in that green space. So I really welcome the proposal here to actually refurbish and bring greater glory, I think, to this park. And one also need to commend the three councillors there that I know that do a tremendous amount to ensure that this heritage and this green space is kept in its glory, so that the citizens, residents of Derby and beyond can actually benefit from it. I also know that Darley Park houses the Darley Abbey Cricket Club. So I don't know whether that's a separate entity or project from the park itself, because my children used to played for Darley Abbey, and I just wondered whether the cricket club is a complete entity and whether that could also be part of the project to improve the facilities. But I have to say, I do commend, and a little plea, would it be possible to sneak back the flower beds that were taken away perhaps 5 or 6 years ago? But all in all, I really commend this. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to resurrect the greenhouses and the function, which are probably not capable of doing at the moment. But I share your support for investment in parks and open spaces. I absolutely agree with you how important they are, and I was delighted that this administration put £1 million aside to improve the parks in the city in the latest budget. That was really wonderful. Councillor Bolton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. 4.7, the holiday activities and food programme, that really to be welcomed. And I think also at this juncture, we can perhaps raise the breakfast clubs that the government have funded locally. And I know we're going to be welcoming those new initiatives in Blakery's ward. But my concern about the holiday activities and food programme is on point 4.73, where it mentions that details of attendees are not held centrally. However, from Easter, which is next month, a new booking system will be introduced. Can I have some explanation on what that booking system is and how that will be rolled out to schools? I think that's important that people know how they can obviously book these holiday activities, because obviously many parents and carers need to continue their work, and the cost of childcare obviously mounts up. So I think this is really important that the people who use this know early and how to use the booking system. 4.7.2, just to show that I have scrutinised the report, the actual figures quoted in that paragraph come to 6167, not 6187. So I don't know where 20 children have gone, but they're certainly not in that list. I just wanted to ensure that the numbers were correct. But obviously this is to be welcomed. And as a school governor myself, and from casework that I deal with in Blakeries, there are many, many families who need this support. And obviously with my school governor hat on, I know through the breakfast clubs and the out-of-school clubs that are attended where I'm a governor, families and carers really need the support. And it's something that I'd welcome. But I just want some fine-tuning on the booking system, which will be obviously operated very quickly, so parents and carers can get access. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Oh, hopefully we didn't lose those 20 children in the course of the activities, but yes, by all means we can ask for that, and we certainly should. There may be some GDPR issues, I guess, about recording understanding numbers of attendees and names of people and things, but yeah, the registration scheme needs to be clear. I guess the officers aren't really in a position to answer any more detail on that.
Unfortunately not. Again, we'll take it back to colleagues in People Services and get back to you, Councillor Bolton.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, yeah, in terms of the recommendation, I'd like to welcome the report rather than note it, because it does contain, as we've heard, some really good examples of some excellent projects and funding coming through to support them. And I think it is worth highlighting the Household Support Fund as well, because that has provided a lot of support, I think, probably to all of our constituents over recent times who've been struggling with energy costs and all the other financial constraints that have faced households in recent times. So it's positive to see this continuing. Positive to see the support for the warm hubs going forward, as well as many of us will have visited those in our ward. In Chaddiston, we have the St Philip's warm hub in the church hall there, which is really, really excellent and provides a really high quality support for people in the Chaddiston area. And I think from the council's point of view, it's welcome to have the certainty of knowing that this support is provided for the whole financial year, and it's more certain now than it has been in the past. And it's also good to see the mentioned at 4.3.4 that Derby City Council has been held up as an exemplar of how to use this fund, in terms of it being well coordinated and an empathetic approach, and it's really making a difference. So it's nice to get that feedback from DWP. I think a recent audit identified this, so congratulations to everyone who's been involved in that, Chair. And if we can welcome the report, that would be good.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these facilities have become almost standard. They've been there a long time now, and over a few years, and they would be difficult to stop, I think, now, or there'd have to be some sort of replacement put in place if the funding wasn't available or the grants weren't available. So, yes, I'm more than happy to let Councillor Wright speak again before we make a final recommendation.
Oh, it's all good, it's all positive, but just an observation here, Chair. 4.32 on the top of page 7, it has been mentioned here, but I think what would be welcome is more granular data in relation to the demographics. It does say here that there's not a requirement to collect sex or gender statistics. I think we ought to do that, please. And if possible, because I think the more information you have, I would have thought that in order to expedite services and engagement, the better that our position will be. So perhaps granular information in relation to ward and also sex would also be helpful in terms of profiling our recipients.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sure the officers can take that back as well, but I guess there may be some issues around justifying the requirement to give that information, or making it voluntary information or whatever. There must be some reason why it's not there, I would think, but perhaps you could look at that and come back to us. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also happy to join in welcoming this report, and in a bit of cross-party unity, I'm happy to welcome the additional £1 million of parks funding that you mentioned, Chair, and as Councillor Bolton mentioned, I'm also happy to welcome the breakfast clubs. I've got one in my ward, and I'm sure it'll make a real big improvement there as well, so happy to bring some cross-party unity there. But my question's actually on neither of those aspects of this. It's on 4.1, the public health, the substance misuse funding. I chair the Council's Communities, Housing and Public Protection Scrutiny Review Board, and obviously Councillor Chambers, you sat on that board before going into Cabinet, and when you were on the board with us, we received a presentation on homelessness, and one of the big things that came from that was around how substance misuse plays a role in homelessness continuation, and how it's one of the biggest barriers in terms of getting somebody into a property and what can happen then within that property, and what people who are involved in that trade can do to people that end up in homes like that. And how it can be one of the things that pulls people back into homelessness once they're out of it, or continues them in homelessness. And I'm pleased to see in part of this, this is a rolling in of several grants, one of those being the rough sleeping drug and alcohol treatment grant. But I wonder if there's any more information that can be provided on this, the substance misuse funding, specifically down to homelessness, because one of the things that came out of the presentation the board received was around the fact that more support for substance misuse, perhaps dedicated officers or a number of dedicated officers, could really help us with the situation we have in the city. So I just wondered if any more information could be provided on that particular aspect.
I see the officers making a note of what you said, Matt, because it's actually unfortunate we don't have somebody that's able to answer a bit more detail on these, but I'm sure you'll be able to seek the information and come back to
Yeah, again, at the risk of repeating myself, I'll take it back and get back to you, Councillor.
Okay, unless there's anything else on that item, there is one item that's not been mentioned much, and that's the debt write-off, totaling just over £2.5 million. I'm aware that the Cabinet have asked for more detail, a breakdown of that, and that's contained within the pink papers of this
yes,
meeting.
which is item 12.
We can consider under item 12. What I'm struggling with, Craig, is the spiel for calling for the meeting to be adjourned. You've got that handy?
Yes, just bear one sec.
It's not on my agenda, actually.
It's on the front sheet, so would you like me to read it out? Or
Yes, you would, please. This is a proposal for the next stage of the meeting.
Yep, so to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items, that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussions of the following items on the grounds they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Can that be agreed? Good. In that case, we can stop the meeting.